Hello and welcome back to BT Live. I'm Zoe Alexandra and joined by the amazing Rania Khalek, who's back in Lebanon. Rania, how's it going?
Oh, just getting through the jet lag. And also the way we opened, it felt like I was smiling for a yearbook photo. Anyways, good to be on. Zoe, there's so much happening.
There's actually so much happening. It's crazy. And if you're excited to hear about the memorandum of understanding that was signed yesterday between Iran and the United States, stay tuned because we are going to break it all down for you, including the reactions from people across the board in the United States, really. Some shock and awe, many different, reactions and takes to essentially what was a humiliating defeat for Trump and a victory for Iran. So we'll get into that. We're also going to be talking today about the Colombian elections that are coming up this Sunday. Very, very important. And of course, we'll do a little sports talk because, it's World Cup season. It's Knicks winning the NBA Finals. We have to do a little intro about that. But before we get into all of that, we do want to remind you that Breakthrough News is an independent media outlet. We are able to bring you this show. We're able to bring you reporting from on the ground, from Kenya, from India, from the West Bank, from Ecuador, from places across the world and here in the United States with your support. We need support of our viewers, support of people who engage with our content to be able to continue to make it. And so if you want to be part of that journey, be part of that mission, please go to breakthroughnews.org/subscribe where you can become a member today. And you can gain...
I'm pointing at it. I was trying to point at it, but I realized it doesn't really work with my camera. Anyways.
It's okay. Well, I couldn't really tell what was happening at all, so I'm just going to trust that it looked good.
It didn't. Never again. Hashtag never again. But to what Zoe was saying.
We want you to subscribe. We want you to become part of this community. As we've announced, as of next week, we will be going with this live stream behind a paywall, and we will be introducing a very special Q&A section, members only. So if you subscribe now, you can be part of that conversation. Once again, the segments from this show will all be available on YouTube, but only members will get to see this fun in between talk. And as Rania has been quick to point out, if you are a patron, do not worry, you will still get all of these same membership tiers. We're just encouraging people who have not joined and in supporting Breakthrough News to sign up through our website, because that way patron doesn't get any cut of your contribution to our project. So Rania, any other support things, maybe that like support button things. Reminder?
Well, no, to reiterate what Zoe was saying, like you see the Free Press run by Bari Weiss, who's now like in charge of CBS News and apparently CNN.
Coming soon.
But you see something like the Free Press just getting so much, like millions of dollars thrown at it, even though it's crap and nobody really reads it, and it's all just like 100% empire pro-Israel propaganda. The other side has so much money, like they have endless funds. So we're a small outlet, but we punch far above our weight, and we're only able to do this to continue shows like this and others and the journalism that we offer you. Check out our beautiful revamped website, breakthroughnews.org. You can go see all of our excellent written content from all around the world. Really, really important, groundbreaking journalism from on the ground. You've got me here in Lebanon. I mean, how many independent progressive media outlets can say they've got somebody on the ground in a war zone constantly? One of the main anchors. I can bring you like what's happening on the ground here. But you've got Zoe constantly traveling to Latin America and actually all over the world. We're able to cover all this stuff and to bring you all this content because of your support and because we're not funded by Lockheed Martin. So really, if you are able, breakthroughnews.org/subscribe. You can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch, like this very cool Breakthrough News mug, which I love. In addition to other things, you can access content behind the paywall of my show Dispatches, which is always like full of really fun guests. And you guys, I always leave the exciting parts for the end. So the exciting, fun, talking smack about people we all hate is always at the end. That's the stuff you want to hear. Got to give something to our members. So breakthroughnews.org/subscribe. Also, please make sure you smash that like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm.
Like button.
There's that. That's me, in case you didn't know. But it helps boost us in the algorithm that sometimes likes us and sometimes hates us. And make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you share the show. Make sure you engage in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed to Breakthrough News and hit that bell. And that way you get a notification whenever we post new content, whenever we have a live stream like this one. And I know Zoe and I have been teasing you that the live stream will soon be behind a paywall. We're just figuring out the technical side of that. We're just about figured out. So likely, very likely next week, what you're watching right now, will be behind a paywall exclusive for just members. So if you want to keep being able to watch, go to breakthroughnews.org/subscribe. One of the perks you'll get is you'll get to be a part of the Q&A where you can ask us questions and we answer. That will only be for members. In addition to the show when it's live, we will still be putting all the segments with our fantastic guests giving us their analysis. We will still be posting those segments to YouTube after the live stream, but all of the fun in-betweens and getting it as it's happening and the Q&A will be for members only. You don't want to miss out on that. breakthroughnews.org/subscribe. Also, you can donate a one-time donation in the live chat if you're here right now.
Yeah. So take all of those measures to support independent media. And with that, let's get right into the news. So if you've been following the show, if you've been following breakthroughnews.org, our website, you'll know that this Sunday, Colombia is headed to crucial elections. It is the second round of their presidential elections, and 41 million Colombians are eligible to vote for who the next president of the country will be. The polls predict a very close race between the two candidates, one who is a far-right lawyer, the supposed, quote, outsider candidate who, interestingly enough, is backed by Donald Trump and Javier Milei. This is Abelardo de
doesn't get more outsider than that. Sorry.
Doesn't get more outsider than that. Yep. Yeah, just had to. But really, if you Google his name, they'll have outsider in quotes next to it always. Abelardo de la Espriella, who also has vowed to attack the left wing in Colombia, and the other candidate, progressive human rights advocate and Senator Iván Cepeda. They are set to face off this Sunday, June 21st. Colombia has been a historic ally of the United States in Latin America and the Caribbean, but this relationship was dramatically altered when progressive Gustavo Petro won the presidential elections in 2022. And with the possible return of the right wing to what the U.S. loves to call the, quote, Israel of Latin America, all eyes are on Colombia in these elections. So to break down the stakes of this Sunday's election, we are joined by Javier Guerrero, an LA-based Colombian activist. Javier, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Zoe. Hi, Rania. It's a pleasure to be here with y'all.
Well, Javier, the stakes of Sunday's election could not be higher. Let's start by talking out about the two candidates who will face off. Who is Iván Cepeda? What is the vision that he has for Colombia? And on the other hand, who is Abelardo de la Espriella? And what would it mean for him to win the presidency of Colombia?
Yeah, thank you. So, I think the first thing is really to understand that these aren't just two candidates. In many ways, they represent two very distinct sectors in Colombia and in two very distinct paths for the future of the country. Iván Cepeda is someone that really comes out the social rights movement, the Colombian victims movement, and the struggle really for peace. He actually chose indigenous Senator Aida Quiche as his running mate, right? A long-standing activist and leader in the city in the region of Cauca, right? For decades, Cepeda has really worked along the sides of the victims of state violence, the victims of paramilitarism in Colombia, and the armed conflict. He was extremely instrumental on the peace talks with the armed forces of Colombia by signing the peace deal in 2016. Really, he encapsulates his campaign in 5 key priorities for peace, social justice, to fight corruption, and what he calls an agrarian revolution, which really is a continuation of Petro's land redistribution to peasants, and even the idea of for the government to buy directly from the peasants, which is huge, and really also a huge environmental focus, a movement towards alternative energy sources, and so on. I mean, in many ways, Ivan Cepeda represents Colombia's, the victims of Colombia's decades-long civil war, as we say. But really, most importantly, he represents what you mentioned in the beginning, this continuation of this historic shift in Colombian politics that saw the election of the first progressive Petro. It's a huge turn in a country that is shaped by the rule of oligarchy, really conservative and liberal parties aligned with with the military in Washington. So I really do think that that's really what Ivan Cepeda. On the other hand, Abelardo de Las Priella really represents something very different. He's a millionaire. He used to live in Europe and is extremely out of touch with the struggles of everyday Colombia. He's, as you mentioned, he's a conservative lawyer and a very close friend of Álvaro Uribe, and even heads of paramilitaries, these far right wing military death squads that terrorized the country for decades. I mean, a lot of people in Colombia actually call him like the Saul Goodman of the mafia, right? He was representing people involved with human rights violation and violent crimes and tied to the paramilitaries, and even his close friend Álvaro Uribe himself. He has this funny campaign slogan. He said, like, I stand firm. You got to stand firm with the homeland, firme con la patria, which is really a joke, because what he actually means is that he stands firm with the elite, right? Among some of his business partners are people like Juan Carlos Gozain, who's actually a former governor who was removed because of this scandal of the hemophilia cartel, where they were basically embezzling millions of dollars of government's Sundays from the healthcare system. So really, and as you said, he calls himself an outsider. I mean, if by that he means he's been outside the country for a long time, I will agree with that. But he's not an inside. He's not. He's an insider. He's really the evolution of Uribismo under the age of Trump, under the age of Bukele and Milei. And he has very close ties to Uribismo that are both part of his campaign and have endorsed him as well. So yeah, I think he's the same old. Very familiar with that hardline attack on the left, hostility he's very hostile to the peace negotiation, and very closely aligned to Washington. That's really who De Las Priella is.
Well, I really appreciate you breaking that down, and you did. I mean, you explained quite a bit about La Espriella just now, but I want to note some of the statements that he's made about the Colombian left, about Gustavo Petro, about Cepeda, his opponent, because it's pretty crazy. So he's declared that Petro and Cepeda are his enemies. He has said that Gustavo Petro is still a subversive who is violating the law and the Constitution, and that he's part of a mafia. And he has declared that he wants to gut or tear out the insides of the left in the country, and has vowed to close the special jurisdiction for peace and order the withdrawal of many rights of women and LGBTQ people. I mean, very typical, horrific, vile, and violent far-right attitudes here. And this, of course, in a country where the war on the left still has not ended, where human rights defenders and social leaders continue to be killed by paramilitary forces. What would it mean for an openly far-right, anti-left, tough on crime political leader to win the presidency in Colombia?
Yeah, thank you, Rania. This is particularly serious because Colombia is really not a normal political environment. We're talking about a country where, although the Petro administration has been significant in decline and reported of human rights violation committed by state security forces, social leaders continue to be threatened and killed by organized criminal armed groups like El Clan del Golfo, who are basically the paramilitaries rebranded. And De Las Priella, as we say, has very close ties with the paramilitary. So it's just a rebranding. When a presidential candidate like Espriella publicly describes the left as an enemy and speaks about gutting it or tearing out its insides, as he says, people have to hear that differently in Colombia than they would in any other country. That's not rhetoric, but it's a serious threat with a long documented history. Colombia has a long history of violence against activists, trade unionists, peasant organizers and community leaders. Colombia has this bloody political history that goes back decades before Petro. In the last 60 years before Petro, more than 80,000 Colombians have been disappeared, right? And we have to think about what that means. What does it mean to be disappeared? That means that these activists, these people, these civilians were erased from this earth. No trace, not even an opportunity for their families to give them a proper burial. And 20,000 of those would disappear under President Uribe alone, which is basically De Las Espriellas' political leader. And I keep mentioning Uribe because it's important to point this out. De Las Espriellas is the return to Uribismo, meaning the return to this far-right political current that is responsible for some of the most egregious human rights violation in the history of the world. Aim in particular at indigenous people, Afro-Colombians, labor, and environmental movement. It's important to point out actually that Ivan Cepeda's father, Manuel Cepeda Vargas, was assassinated during Colombian state-sponsored paramilitary extermination of the Patriotic Union, which is a political movement in the 80s and 90s. There's documentaries about this where more than 5,000 members were assassinated during this Baile Rojo, as it's called, one of the darkest political violence in political periods in Colombian history. And then guess who was responsible for that violence? Guess who were the main actors? Basically the predecessors of De Las Espriellas' political movement. So what concerns many is not simply that De Las Espriellas is just a conservative. The concern is that he's part of a broader, also international far-right current, this so-called Andric tide that we could keep talking about in the region, that combines aggressive nationalism, attack on political opponents, and really a huge concentration on executive power like Trump, and the framing of social problems and issues that can be solved primarily through punishment and force and the building of mega prisons, as he says. And the irony of all this, though, is that the security crisis itself in Colombia is often exaggerated for political purpose. Colombia, obviously faces huge security challenges, but its homicide rates have remained stable compared with the previous administration. So they keep building up this idea that there's a huge insecurity, there's a huge crisis in the country, and they're the only saviors of this. And that's the rhetoric that they use. Really the deeper issues involved in Colombia is really about territorial control, these illegal armed groups, inequality, and the legacy of the armed conflict that they themselves started. So I think, and then the right has that on its side because they use their vast private media apparatus to really transform this complex structural problem into a narrative that supposedly only a strong man like De Las Espriellas can solve.
Well, I mean, I would add just one thing is that Alvaro Uribe, who's the architect of this genocidal attack on the left and on the people of Colombia, studied at the Kennedy School at Harvard. So no coincidence there. One other thing I wanted to touch on is that after the first round of the election on May 31st, which again was a very, very close race, this was when all of the candidates were running, but the difference between De Las Espriellas and Cepeda was very close. And there were claims made by Cepeda's campaign that there were irregularities in the vote count and foreign interference in the process, notably from Ecuadorian President Daniel Noboa, another millionaire who has U.S. citizenship as well. So, and with this race that's coming up on Sunday, we've seen another round of kind of denunciations of foreign interference. Specifically, we even saw yesterday Democratic lawmakers in the U.S. raise the alarm about violations of Colombian sovereignty due to statements from top U.S. officials, namely U.S. President Donald Trump. So I want to pull up the statement that Trump made regarding the elections on Sunday. Let's see if we can get that on the screen of what Trump thinks about the Colombian elections. But I will start reading it because he says, it sounds very similar to a statement that we saw ahead of the Honduran elections in November 2025. Trump said, as president, Abelardo will be tremendously successful in leading Colombia to grow the economy, create jobs, promote trade, stop illegal immigration, crack down on crime and drugs, restore law and order. Abelardo is running against a radical left Marxist in the runoff on Sunday, June 21st. The results of this election are very important to the future of Colombia and its relationship to the United States. If Abelardo wins, and because of his competence and love of the country, will have the total support and strength of the United States behind him. Okay, wow. What do you make of this statement? And are people worried about the integrity of the elections this Sunday?
Yeah, I do think people are worried. I mean, Colombia has a long and documented history of rampant electoral fraud to secure its power, especially from the right, from vote buying, forced voting, coercion, ballot tampering, and many other things. I mean, these same allegations were raised by the Cepeda campaign. But I think the biggest violation here is what you're talking about, this huge foreign interference and meddling in its election and sovereignty by the Trump administration and many other actors in the region, right? Just before the election, Colombia's government formally actually accused Ecuadorian President Daniel Noboa of interfering, right? As you said, and he basically met with Abelardo de la Espriella during his campaign to talk about policy, although he's not even the president yet. Abelardo de la Espriella himself bragged about meeting with Marco Rubio, and we know what that meeting could have been about, right? But what you're talking about here, this public endorsement by Trump of De La Espriella and his support, for and he's pledging his support for he's pledging his support for Colombia to his victory, to De La Espriella's victory. That's not a subtle signal. It's really a tactic that has been repeated by Trump in the region more than once. And in Colombia, as you said, has historically been Washington's closest strategic ally in South America. So when a sitting U.S. president tells basically Colombians which candidate would enjoy the backing of the U.S., many people obviously see it as inappropriate and a violation of their sovereignty and electoral process. At the end of the day, really, what matters the most is that Colombians should be able to decide their future, not Washington, not Quito, or any other external actor.
Yeah, it's so wild. Imagine if the heads of other states were giving opinions about who they wanted to win in the U.S. You wouldn't hear the end of it. Unless it's Benjamin Netanyahu, in which case, exception. But, I want to zoom out, Javier, and look at the region as a whole, because, a couple years ago when Gustavo Petro was elected president of Colombia, things were looking quite strong for the region with this kind of second progressive pink tide. And then you look at what's happening right now, and the left and progressive governments are quite few and far between in Honduras, Bolivia, Chile, Argentina, Ecuador, Peru. We've seen significant setbacks where progressive forces were in power, but are no longer. And then you see Cuba is totally isolated and cornered and just being completely suffocated. You've really only got Mexico, who's daring to provide the sort of minimum humanitarian aid as Cuba is totally strangled by the Trump administration right now. What would it mean for the right to triumph in Colombia, yet another Latin American country?
Yeah, I mean, I think it will be another huge setback, another huge flow. Really, Latin America, it's entering what some call the full-fledged, what some are calling this angry tide that I mentioned earlier, which is basically a widespread political shift from what was then called the progressive pink tide. I mean, there's many names for it. Really, that was signaled by the election of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela and other left progressive victories in Ecuador, Bolivia, Brazil, Argentina, and so on. Those governments really achieve important gains, but they also face huge domestic pressure by the domestic elites, use imperialism, sanctions campaigns led by the United States, coups, even lawfare campaigns, and economic crisis. So I think what we're living through right now is really a period of a backlash from this. Colombia has historically been Washington's closest ally in South America, but under Petro, that relationship changed. Relations with Venezuela were normalized, integration was increased, and he was actually, Petro was very outspoken on the genocide on Gaza led by Israel and backed by Trump and the United States, and really also being very critical on Trump's military aggression attacks on Cuba and Venezuela. He represented a departure in a somewhat more independent foreign policy, and his election and that of AMLO and later Sheinbaum in Mexico really gave people a glimpse of hope. So what we're, that hope, but what we're seeing across Latin America is the rise of this angry tide that instead of mobilizing hope and social transformation, it mobilizes frustration, insecurity, and anger. Recently, a huge development, the Trump administration secured an alliance with its partners in Latin America and the Caribbean, the so-called Shield of the Americas, an alliance of 12 countries to undertake intelligence, security, and military actions. aim at preserving U.S. hegemony in the area. Is really, when you really think about it, it's the start of a Latin America wannabe NATO. And this is what Colombia matters so much. If the La Espriella wins, strengthen this continental axis represented by Trump, Bukele, Milei, Novoa in Ecuador, and very other right-wing governments. It will likely, as you said, increase the pressure on Venezuela and Cuba and weakens efforts in Latin America towards integration and encourage a broader rightward shift really in the region. And that's particularly important because right now, as we're sitting right now, we are all awaiting the results of Peru's presidential election, which is basically neck and neck, but also involving a deep legitimacy crisis. The Colombian election could help really set the tone for the next political cycle in Latin America. On the other hand, if Cepeda wins, it will demonstrate that progressive forces can still compete despite this right-wing trend that we're seeing. It will preserve a government in Colombia committed to peace, regional cooperation, and more independent in foreign policy. So really, this election is not just about who governs Colombia in the next 4 years. It's really about the political balance of the hemisphere and where Latin America moves towards, whether it moves towards more authoritarian right-wing populism or maintain space for progressive and popular movements in the regions, which is what we need.
Well, Javier, thank you so much for joining us. And we will definitely be watching to see what happens this Sunday. Because as you said, this is not only about Colombia, it's about the region and, of course, the region's relationship with the United States under Donald Trump. So we'll be watching that, and you can follow breakthroughnews.org for updates on the elections. So make sure that you've bookmarked that page, and Javier will let you go, but thank you once again for the fantastic analysis.
No, thank you, Zoe and Rania. It's a pleasure.
Great. Well,
really glad we were able to cover that. And like Zoe said, keep your eye on Breakthrough News. We'll continue to. But with that, we've got our next guest ready to go. So we're just going to go ahead and move on to our next segment, which has to do with Israel. And that is because, public opinion on Israel. The Israel of Israel? Is that what you said? What is real about Israel? Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm blaming jet lag for anything I say that is just cringy. And that was one of them. But in all seriousness, public opinion on Israel in the U.S. is cratering, as we've covered on this show. By some measures, over 80% of Democrats now hold an unfavorable view of Israel. A growing number of Republicans do as well. So the people who've spent decades building that U.S.-Israel relationship, they know what that means. That sentiment eventually shows up in Congress, threatening Israel's unconditional weapons supply from Washington. So they're moving now, while they still can, through quieter, more insidious measures that most people have not heard of. One of them is called Section 224, which is buried in the House's defense bill. It would have the Secretary of War designate an executive agent to fuse the U.S. and Israeli defense industrial sectors, integrating Israeli-developed technology directly into U.S. research, procurement, and manufacturing across everything from AI to biotech to missile defense. Experts are warning that this would be nearly impossible to undo. And there's something called Section 622. With similar aims, it's buried in the Senate's intelligence bill. Today, we're talking about all of that with Prem Thakker, political correspondent and columnist for Zeteo. Prem, welcome to Breakthrough News Live.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Well, it's so good to get you on the show, and you have been following these developments, so you're the perfect person to speak to about them. Let's start with Section 224, which is actually titled the U.S.-Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative, and like I mentioned, it's buried in the House's draft of next year's National Defense Authorization Act. So to give people an idea of how much the Israelis are pushing for this, I just also want to note that Netanyahu reportedly wrote a personal letter to a member of Congress thanking him for backing it. So Prem, walk us through what this actually does, who's pushing for it, and why people should care.
Yes, so your intro laid it out perfectly. Honestly, the Senate and the House versions are kind of parallel and tandem as the NDAA moves through Congress over the coming weeks, the Pentagon budget authorization legislation. And what's important to understand is, as you lay out, is that Obviously, public opinion in America is massively tanking towards the U.S. Israel relationship. That includes, of course, the billions of dollars every year that the U.S. sends to Israel. And that's just, of course, the 3.8 billion that we know for sure. But as we've seen just in the past 3 years, that's involved many, many more supplements of aid and of weapons. Um, and with that creating of public opinion, out came this idea that's kind of been in the works for years, which we'll get into, to formalize the U.S. Israel relationship in other crafty, creative ways that goes beyond and kind of sidesteps this question of money to Israel. Essentially, what these amendments seek to do is formalize and deepen the relationship between the U.S. and Israeli militaries in such a way that is, as you say, almost irreversible. It is at once something that would deeply integrate the co-production of weapons, the sharing of data, integration of AI, cybersecurity and research processes, biotechnology, you name it, any sort of scary possible word that deals with the security state and our militaries would be integrated in a way that goes far beyond anything beforehand of just being allied nations. This would be something that the US would have no probably similar analog to with regards to other allies. That's how deep this could go.
Mm.
The reason that is so important is not just because it'd be so deeply entrenched, but also because that also limits congressional oversight. Already we've seen there's limits to how much Congress can do or even has the will to do when it comes to just simply following the law and cutting even some aid or weapons to Israel as it's committing a genocide. One can only imagine how much harder it is to hold a foreign country accountable when it's essentially integrated with all of our processes.
Mm. Well, it's crazy. And also the fact that so many people are just not even aware of this as you said, as public support for an arms embargo in Israel is more popular than ever. But, as you mentioned and Rania mentioned earlier, the companion piece to Section 224 is Section 622 in the Senate's intelligence bill introduced by Senator Tom Cotton. And this would lock in expanded intelligence sharing with Israel and make it nearly impossible for a future president to scale it back, unless they can point to what the bill calls a specific and identifiable national security concern. This is moving forward right as the Pentagon's own counterintelligence people are reportedly raising the threat level on Israeli spying against the U.S. What's the significance of this provision, and what do you make of that timing?
I mean, yes, these addendums that are added to these bills about exceptions of, unless there's a security risk or unless the recipient of such aid is found to be breaking the law. It's window dressing. There's no actual mechanism to deploy to use that language to say, hey, this actually doesn't make sense, because that language invalidates the entire thing, as you're suggesting. That if one were serious about national security interests or about protecting the homeland, this relationship would make no sense, because the Israeli government, like other nations, but particularly the Israeli government, has done a great job of maintaining a spying apparatus over the U.S., particularly U.S. officials. We've seen how the Israeli government has exerted massive influence on the daily life of U.S. society just for the past 2.5 years in terms of how much free speech people have. And so it's almost silly that they even, especially senators like Tom Cotton, even bother to include that language, because we know they don't care about it. I would just want to point to the fact that, this development is not coming out of nowhere, that there is in fact some seeds that have led to this moment, that it wasn't spontaneous, that several Republicans and Benjamin Netanyahu all at once have advanced this vision to integrate the U.S. and Israeli militaries. There's a lot to say. I want to make sure I get to your questions before we dive into that, because there's a lot to get into with regards to where this is coming from.
Well, yeah, I do. I want to get to where it's coming from for sure. And there's particular forces behind it. But I do first want to ask you, I'm glad you allowed me to get to this, because a lot of this is also a result, yes, of there's forces pushing for it, but because of a shift in public opinion on Israel in the U.S., which has cratered since October 7th. And you've really been tracking that shift quite closely, as the Israel lobby has as well. So I guess, why does this moment matter? And how is that shift, that cratering of support for Israel, shaping the strategy behind something like Section 224? And it goes along with what you're talking about with the attack on free speech. It's really these really, really anti-democratic measures, because the U.S. is still like an ostensible democracy, right? So like, if people are getting to elect their representatives and more people hate Israel, that's a big problem if you're Israel or supportive of Israel, and you just like need that endless weapons flow to continue this project.
If you look at several different parts of this moment, you can understand why it is so urgent for pro-Israel Republicans, maybe some pro-Israel Democrats in the Israeli government, to codify this as soon as possible. For one, with regards to Netanyahu, obviously his political future is uncertain. He has an opposition that is mounting a campaign against him. He has his own charge that he has to deal with if he indeed loses. So this is existential for him personally, in terms of showing people, his constituency, that he can still get results. Those results, I guess, including unconditional support for whatever violence they want to do. With regards to pro-Israel politicians in this country, it was already clear in the past year, even, I guess, in some respects, because of the loss of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, or I should say Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, that the entire relationship is fundamentally different, and there's no going back with regards to how people in this country feel about Israel and the U.S. relationship to it. That is all the more aggravated in kind of this period where, on one hand, there's ostensible ceasefires in places like Gaza, where there's meant to be reconstruction being had. Obviously, that's not really the case. There's been 1,000 people in Palestine killed since the ceasefire, and in Gaza specifically, let alone all the violence in the West Bank. There's this sort of fledgling, unsuccessful, as we've seen, hopefully to be the case this week, war on Iran that will hopefully come to an end, that was also in some respects seen as this kind of desperate last throes of violence to try to, in terms of the Israeli government, advance its Greater Israel project. All to say, there's all these different expressions of desperation, of just trying to grasp for whatever they can. And especially with the hopeful sundowning of this disastrous war, Israel is coming to see that there aren't that many levers left to pull. And so, if that is the case, and if sort of things are going back on the horizon, the final thing you can really do up to this point, especially given how many politicians are being elected on the premise of cutting the U.S.-Israel relationship, is to codify it as much as possible before they get elected. I mean, you see all of these elections all across the country, particularly Democratic ones, where over and over again, the one who is more critical of Israel, if not is winning, is completely shifting the entire conversation. In almost every single primary, it's almost unacceptable for a candidate to say that they believe the current U.S.-Israel relationship is acceptable. And so because of that, they are very desperate in whatever way they can to deepen these ties, because soon enough, it is very possible that there could actually be some structural changes to this relationship that would have been unforeseen even in a year or two ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild. And I think right now, a lot of those pro-Israel hawks are sort of panicking, especially as this deal comes kind of to fruition. And I wanted to speak about, the connection to the war in Iran, and a lot of the same forces that are pushing for this provision, Section 224, have also played a major role in building the case for the war that is U.S. and Israel just fought against Iran. Specifically, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, an organization that, despite its name, does not do a whole lot of defending democracy. So can you walk us through their role in pushing for these measures?
Yes, and I would highly recommend. We have this great piece on our website at Zeteo from about a week and a half ago that really traces down each part of what I'm about to say. I think it's a good resource for your listeners, but also those who might want to share it with their friends or family. I think it's a very, very helpful resource that touches on a lot of different aspects of foreign policy, both on the Republican and Democratic side, that you will find very useful. So the Foundations for Defense of Democracy, FDD. It was founded by this New York Times journalist turned Republican staffer in 2001, and it was known as Emet at the time, the Hebrew word for truth. And the purpose originally at the time was to provide education to enhance Israel's image in North America, I believe is the exact quote. After 9/11, a few months later, they had changed their name to FDD, and they sort of expanded their prerogative, but they kind of said not enough to really shroud their main interests. And at the time, it was kind of this very bipartisan organization. You know, their advisors included Newt Gingrich, it included several sort of former FBI and CIA directors, and even Chuck Schumer and Joe Lieberman and Donna Brazile, who were advisors as well. The Democrats over time left as the organization got more partisan, but it's notable that the only reason they left was because it got more partisan, not because they disagreed with the aims. The group also got a lot of money from fan favorites even today, including Bernard Marcus, Paul Singer, Sheldon Adelson, and the like. And so fast forwarding to recently, the Trump administration had been caught kind of, I mean, I don't want to say caught. I mean, they just kind of did it. They were reusing FDD infographics and even copying and pasting FDD talking points almost word for word to justify this, horrible, disastrous war in Iran. And also, there's this weird revolving door between the Trump administration, the Israeli government, and FDD. So there were several FDD advisors and staffers who previously worked for the Trump White House, including one who was the literal director for supposedly countering Iranian WMDs for the National Security Council. There was another who was Trump's deputy national security advisor. And there was one fellow at the FDD who I want to specifically mention. He was literally Netanyahu's advisor who led negotiations for the deal to have the U.S. to send Israel $3.8 billion every single year. He also led a committee by his own last name, which advanced the recommendation to develop the Iron Dome. And so I want to reiterate, someone who works for a supposedly American organization was the literal advisor and lead negotiator for a foreign government to take billions of dollars from the American government, who now works alongside people who used to work for the Trump White House also. So that is FDD. And last year, they had published this memo called I believe it was called the United States-Israel Strategic Partnership Agreement. So very similar actually to the names that you're seeing in the NDAA amendment process right now. And it was kind of framed as the successor to the current MOU that sends the $3.8 billion to Israel every year. FDD framed this agreement, the U.S.-Israel Strategic Partnership Agreement, as mutually beneficial, as this kind of symbiotic path forward that would, have Israel guaranteeing benefits and purchases from the U.S. In terms of weapons and so forth. And that would, create American jobs. It would send Israeli cash flows into the U.S. and also, of course, this agreement would support joint U.S.-Israeli efforts for research, development, and the like. So this was, framed as this revolutionary sort of almost Marshall Plan-esque idea to strengthen the defense base and of course ensure these deep ties between the countries. And this plan did involve still sending aid to Israel with, of course, the promise that Israel would only spend it on American ventures. So that's where you get sort of this idea that it's benefiting the United States. Fast forward a few months, lo and behold, all of a sudden, in the NDAA outcrops these amendments that have very similar names about mutually beneficial ties between the U.S. and Israeli militaries and governments for joint development, joint construction, joint production of strong ties within the countries that will perhaps be successors to the current aid structure. I think it's important. I mean, you brought this up, Rania, that Netanyahu himself thanked a Republican reportedly for supporting his plan. He called it my plan. There have been some Democrats over the past few months that have pointed to the fact that Netanyahu himself says we have to, end the current aid apparatus that we have as a sort of pathway for them to say the right thing. If you are pointing to Lindsey Graham and Benjamin Netanyahu as support for your way to try to say, yeah, we should change the U.S.-Israel aid relationship, you're a fool. Because it's very clear that they're using that as a wink and nod to be kind of shrewd, to use this moment and to use FDD's blueprint, apparently, as an off-ramp from this massive tanking of U.S. public opinion to have what we have now, which is Netanyahu and Lindsey Graham saying they would actually, I'd like to see an end to the current aid structure to Israel. We don't need the $3.8 billion every year. They're obviously not saying they don't like this vampiristic relationship. They're trying to be clever. They're trying to adapt to political realities and to use this as a sleight of hand while pushing what you're seeing now is this vision to integrate the U.S. and Israeli militaries.
I mean, it's actually brilliant in a way, the spin of it. But it's really important that reporters like you are getting ahead of it and explaining it, because these are things that not many people have heard of. And it's so easy to tuck these kinds of provisions into this massive defense authorization bill that gets passed every year because you bury it. There's like a million other measures in there that get debated and thrown in and thrown out. So thank you so much, Prem, for making sure we don't forget about these ones. We will continue following your coverage of this, and I encourage everybody else to. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you guys so much. Take care, all right?
You too.
Prem's work on this is fantastic, and when he covers something, he stays on it. So really continue to pay attention to those measures. They're going to get renamed. They're probably going to. I think Section 224 isn't even Section 224 anymore, but it's just become known as that. So we're still calling it that. But it's really. I mean, look, Netanyahu has had a very long career, and it's because he's really good at being manipulative and good at spinning things. So he's spinning this well so far.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's a great segue into another very related topic, and that is the war on Iran, which hopefully is coming to an end. The U.S. and Iran have signed a memorandum of understanding that includes major concessions from the Americans, among them unfreezing roughly billions of dollars in seized Iranian assets and committing to lifting sanctions on a future schedule as part of the final deal. The agreement also declares an immediate end to hostilities on all fronts, including Lebanon, and opens a 60-day window to negotiate the unresolved issues, chief among them what happens with Iran's nuclear program and its stockpile of enriched uranium. The deal doesn't grant Iran enriched uranium rights, but it does defer that question entirely to those final negotiations, which is a huge win for Iran. And this deal also notably leaves Iran jointly with Oman in charge of deciding the Strait of Hormuz's future administration, including fees, once the initial 60-day toll-free window ends. And then again, on Lebanon, there's already a dispute brewing. Iran says the ceasefire requires Israel to leave Lebanese territory, but U.S. officials say withdrawal isn't actually a condition of the deal, and Israel has said outright that it is not pulling out. So everyone is watching whether Israeli strikes on Lebanon continue, which they have. Today, Israel did kill 3 people. And whether that ends up unraveling the agreement entirely and what happens with the ongoing Israeli occupation of Lebanon. Joining us to discuss all of this is Naveed Zarinel, a Tehran-based journalist. Naveed, welcome to Breakthrough News Live.
Rania and Zoe, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us from Iran. And we want to get your take from Iran on this memorandum, which includes a lot of ground given to Iran, as I described. And Trump basically admitted at the G7 that the calculus changed because of oil. He said the U.S. would run out of reserves in about 4 weeks without opening the Strait of Hormuz. It's not even entirely clear whether he meant U.S. reserves or global ones, but either way, it is a remarkable admission that the Strait was Iran's biggest point of leverage. Now that we've reached this point, I'm curious, what are your general thoughts on this memorandum of understanding?
Yes, so last night, I think it was around 8 p.m. Tehran time when I saw the memorandum of understanding from the American media. And at first I thought it was fake news because I'd seen it on some Telegram channels and it was circulating. But then when the US media published it, I understood that it's official. And I thought it was fake news because it is so favorable to Iran. And in a way, you could say that it's the opposite of what Trump wanted, because he wanted total surrender, unconditional surrender by Iran. But in this case, based on the text of the memorandum, it is a total surrender by the US. And as you mentioned, Rania, there are about 14 points. And out of those 14 points, the last two, so points 13 and 14 are more procedural, but points 1 through 12, with the exception of points 9 and 10, the rest are heavily in Iran's favor. And they are getting things that they didn't have before the war, like you mentioned. So the freezing of Iranian assets, which are Iran's own money, that were frozen in transit because of US bullying and US sanctions. But more importantly, I think the most important point is widespread sanctions relief. So oil sanctions are immediately being lifted, so Iran can sell its oil and derivatives of oil, so products that are derivatives of oil. And then after that, so after the 60 days, the text of the agreement says that the US would also lift the primary and secondary sanctions on Iran. And that would be very important for Iran because the $300 billion investment fund that Iran is getting probably through US regional allies, that is just enough to reconstruct and pay for the war damages. So in a way, it's the war reparations clause that is put in there through an investment fund. But then beyond that, the sanction relief would actually help Iran's economy thrive. But the problem here is that even though the text of the memorandum is heavily in Iran's favor, when it comes to the implementation, we are much more skeptical because the US has a very bad record when it comes to dealing with Iran. So Trump withdrew from the JCPOA. Even during the last 2 years of the Obama presidency, he was not really implementing the deal, the Obama administration, minus some exceptions. And also Trump bombed Iran twice during negotiations. So some are saying that this is just to buy time and the US will not implement it. And even if it does implement it, the chances of widespread and wide sanctions relief are, I think, pretty limited. And then there's also the problem of Israel, as you mentioned, that there is still attacking and bombing Lebanon. So most likely Israel will violate the first part of the first point of the memorandum, which is the ceasing of hostilities on all fronts, including Lebanon. And Lebanon is explicitly in the text of the agreement.
Well, Naveed, I'm glad you mentioned that there is some skepticism regarding the deal and the implementation of it, because there have been reports saying that people inside Iran are unhappy with the deal and there's little trust with the U.S. What has been the general sentiment in the country for the last 24 hours since this text was released?
Yeah, so I think it was Sunday when they were talking about the memorandum coming out, even though we didn't have the text yet. But I went to the Foreign Ministry building, which is in central Tehran, near Imam Khomeini Square, and there were thousands of people there protesting, and they were protesting Ghalibaf and Araqchi, who are Iran's negotiation team representatives. And they were saying that we don't want a deal because the US has attacked us. They have killed our leader. And they were worried because of the bad history and the lack of trust they have in the US. So they were protesting any deal with the US, or rather, there were two currents, basically. So one current was protesting negotiations and a deal altogether. And the other current was saying that we don't want a bad deal. And then we also have to be very careful about dealing with the US. So I think in a way that was a way to put pressure on the officials not to come to a bad agreement with the US. So you have that, but you also have a lot of other people in the country who are very hopeful and happy about the deal because they understand that Iran's economy is impacted by prolonged fighting. A lot of the projects are put on hold. The internet was shut down for a long time. Now it's back on. But because of the disruptions to life and to the economy, a lot of people are hopeful. And this time they think it's different because they think that Iran has the leverage And if the U.S. tries to cheat on the deal, Iran will close the Strait of Hormuz again, and they will, in a sense, force the U.S. to abide by most of its commitments in the memorandum of understanding.
And, to that end, I wanted to expand on, some tension maybe inside the country, because the reformists have generally pushed for compromise with the U.S., while the people referred to in U.S. media as hardliners, and I know you've challenged that term. I'm just using that as a placeholder, at least, because I'm not really sure how else to describe those who aren't the reformists. But regardless, the hardliners have basically run this war, right? And they did not capitulate, or their attitudes, ran this war. What does it mean for the reformists' future now that hard power, not concession, is what is producing these concessions from the Americans, including potential upcoming sanctions relief? And on that note, there's apparently also a tension inside the system right now between, again, I'm sorry for using this term, but between the hardliners and the sort of negotiating track. At least that's how it's being portrayed, with some street protests in Tehran chanting against even Arakchi and Ghalibaf by name, even though Ghalibaf himself is a former IRGC guy. And the IRGC's own institutional leadership did sign off on this through the Supreme National Security Council. But I guess my question with that is this, so what's going to happen with the reformists? And is this actually IRGC versus diplomats, or is it more a split between the people running the deal and an ideological faction that feels betrayed by it? Or is all of that too simplistic or not accurate?
Yes, I mean, even within the so-called hardliners that you could also call the pro-resistance camp or the pro-resistance camp, even within those people, you find someone like Ayatollah Mir Bagheri, who is considered one of the most hardline clerics in Iran. He was actually in support of the deal, and he tweeted saying that the negotiating team is different this time and everything is different this time, so just trust the negotiations. And also the new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, is supervising the negotiations very closely. So you even have that kind of mentality within the hardliners or the pro-resistance camp. But as I mentioned earlier, the people were coming to the streets, and also some other officials, whether they're members of parliament or clerics that have influence within the masses, they're saying that, no, we don't want to negotiate whatsoever because of what the U.S. has done, initiating a war, cheating on negotiations several times, and we should just keep fighting. So there's that. And as I said, so you do have this kind of diversity within the hardline or the pro-resistance camp. But what you also have is that the reformists are, for the most part, losing the foreign policy narrative, because for the longest time they were saying that, just let us give concessions to the West, and then we can live a normal, happy, comfortable life with no sanctions. But then the experience of the past 11 years shows that that proved to be wrong. So the reformists have, in a way, lost the foreign policy narrative, and the resistance camp definitely has the upper hand when it comes to both the foreign policy narrative and the foreign policy decisions. But I would say generally right now there is a unity between the different camps when it comes to this war, and basically defending Iran's interests and sovereignty against U.S. and Israeli aggression, and that has been reflected in the memorandum of understanding.
Well, I wanted to also get your take on the Lebanon angle here, because as was mentioned earlier, the Memorandum of Understanding declares in the first point an end to hostilities, including in Lebanon, and also protecting Lebanon's territorial integrity. But Israel has continued striking the south, and Israeli officials have repeated day after day that they refuse to withdraw. And of course, withdrawing troops from southern Lebanon would be like political suicide for Netanyahu or any Israeli official who would even get behind that. So they really have unless the U.S. comes down hard and basically, Trump uses actual real leverage to force this, the Israelis are going to keep violating it. So how do you think Iran responds if Israel keeps testing this, which we know they're going to keep testing this? I mean, just today they killed 3 people in southern Lebanon. Yesterday they killed 4. Could Iran actually walk away from the deal over continued strikes and occupation of Lebanon? Or do you think there's too much riding on the sanctions relief and other American concessions to Iran for that to be realistic?
No, it's a great question. And yes, my worry is that if it is just Israel violating the first point of the memorandum, Iran might not walk away from the deal. But if it is the several elements and several of the points being violated, such as U.S. Not offering proper and meaningful sanctions relief, then I think Iran would have an incentive to close the Strait of Hormuz again. And the worry here would be that Iran would lose some of the momentum, because for the past 100 days, the prices of oil had gone up, and the oil reserves were also running out. So they could have gone much higher than, I think they were about $90 to $95 before the memorandum. Now they are somewhere in the 70s. So they would lose some of that momentum, but I think they could regain it relatively quickly. But at the end of the day, yes, my worry is that Iran wouldn't just say retaliate against Israel or walk away from the deal if only the first point of the memorandum is violated, which is the ceasing of hostilities on all fronts. But what is important to note is that even if Iran does not walk away from the deal, they still support Lebanon and Hezbollah in other ways. And Iranian foreign policy is different than American foreign policy. So I think there's that famous American saying that's attributed to Henry Kissinger. I don't know if he actually said it, but you see it in American foreign policy mentality, which is, I think it is, it's fatal to be, it's dangerous to be an enemy of the U.S., but it's fatal to be a friend of the U.S., meaning that the U.S., depending on its realist interests, might betray its friends. But the Iranian foreign policy culture is different, because the idea is that if you have an allyship with someone, you have to really take care of them in hard times. And you see it even in the culture, even in Lebanon. If you go to someone's home and they're your good friend, then when they come to your home, there's that kind of reciprocity and there's that hospitality. And you see that hospitality, an extension of that hospitality from culture to politics. And in the foreign policy approach of Iran, they will take care of Lebanon and Hezbollah, even if they don't walk away from the deal.
Well, definitely not something that the U.S. foreign policy establishment is good at. And I think even with their European allies, they have shown not only will Europe take the mistreatment, but then they will line up to Trump to get whatever approval they want. But Naveed, pivoting a little bit to another international event, the World Cup. The Iranian team has gotten a lot of attention. It's been kind of dominating a lot of the news surrounding the World Cup. Some of it joking, with memes saying that the Iranian team is so good looking that they got Trump to sign the deal. But on a more serious element, is how they've been treated logistically. And so we know that in the lead up to the World Cup, there were threats to even their participation. A U.S. official tried to say that Italy should take Iran's spot. And then Iran sort of negotiated to be able to have their home base in Mexico. But this has meant that they fly in and out on the same day for matches. So they can't stay over in the United States. And, several members of their technical team have even been denied visas. A member of the team, the coach, called Iran the most oppressed team in the World Cup. And the team captain described a 5-hour journey for one game. What's your read on the politics surrounding the team in this tournament? And what does the treatment of the team kind of say about the state of what's happening right now with these talks?
Yeah, so as you're correctly saying in the premise of your question, the treatment of the Iranian national team has been atrocious. And it's not just Iran. I think the U.S. immigration policies and visa policies have really oppressed fans from so many different countries, especially global South countries. There's a story of the goalkeeper of Cape Verde, and his mom was not able to get a visa, but after he went viral, I think they granted a visa to his mother, and so many other stories of fans and even the Somali referee, for example, not being able to enter the U.S. But I think the Iranian coach is correct that the Iranian team has been the most oppressed. And they're dealing with a very difficult situation where they have to fly back on the same day that their match ends, so they don't have much recovery time. And I mean, I'm sure you both fly a lot because you're journalists, and you get so exhausted even if you want to do journalistic work after you're jet lagged or you're flying a lot. And so let alone that, after coming from Asia to the Americas, they have to keep flying back and forth. So it's very difficult and it's very disgraceful. And also the double standards. I mean, FIFA is also guilty here because they're accommodating U.S. behavior. And the very fact that they allowed U.S. to host the competition to begin with, because there's a major double standard here, because when Russia invaded Ukraine, the next day they were kicked out of all international competitions. And this year, too, they couldn't compete for the World Cup. But the U.S. started a far more unjustified and unprovoked war against Iran, but they're hosting the competition, and this is the treatment that they're giving to the Iranian team. And also the other messed up factor are the pro-Pahlavi and the Zionist Persian fans in LA. So for whatever godforsaken reason, they had the bad fortune of also being in LA,
right.
where there are all these crazy Persian pro-Pahlavi Zionist opposition, and they were also trying to harass the team, booing the national anthem, and the people, who were just bringing the actual Iranian flag that has been the Iranian flag for the past 47 years. But ultimately, a lot of that is noise. And FIFA, I think, was, in this case, they were correct to ban the old monarchist flag from being in the stadium, even though their implementation was not that effective. But at the end of the day, I think that's a lot of noise. You're on the ground in the US, you're probably not in LA, but you probably know more than me. I was talking to friends who attended the New Zealand-Iran game, and they were telling me that actually most of the fans were normal fans, and they were just cheering the team. They were not booing the Iran national team, and they performed rather well against New Zealand. And I'm hoping that Belgium will be a tough game. Because Belgium, is a European team that is very strong. But they tied with Egypt, so we have hope that we can beat them. But the hope is that Iran, for the first time, gets out of the group stage and goes to the knockout stage. And if they go to the knockout stage, there's a chance that they play the U.S. Most likely, we will lose to the U.S. because they're the host and they have a slightly stronger team than Iran this time around. But yeah, I'm a football fan, so I'm really excited about all of it. But I definitely hate the way that the Iranian team has been treated. And even though there's so much international and media outrage, there hasn't really been an effective response from FIFA or from the U.S. government.
I mean, it's so outrageous, just so completely outrageous to witness. It's really disgraceful. And the Americans should be embarrassed because you're also just trying to put this team at a disadvantage to score political points as well. And just absurd ways, like these 5-hour security waits to get from Mexico to LA is ridiculous, but it's obviously being done just to make it harder for the Iranian team because of politics. Naveed Zarinal, Tehran-based journalist, thank you so much for joining us. And also thank you for all of the analysis that you've been providing us with here at Breakthrough News throughout this war. You've been in Iran for the entire war. You've also covered it for us. You've written several pieces and done several videos for us. I encourage people to go to breakthroughnews.org and check out Naveed's work there. And hope to have you back on soon as this plays out and develops more.
Thank you, guys.
Well, Zoe, whew,
I just have to make
one
comment about the World Cup. One more before we pivot back to Iran. Well, I maybe it's because of the people that I follow or the content that I engage with on social media, but I do love how everyone is just rallying behind the Global South teams against Europe.
Oh. Players.
and the hot players.
Those are Ranian players. I mean, wow. Wow.
Well, yes. But the excitement over the Global South teams, the excitement over Curacao, which is a small island nation that made it to the World Cup this year. Cape Verde tying with Spain, I believe it was yesterday. Democratic Republic of the Congo tying with Portugal, who has Ronaldo, if I'm not mistaken. I'm really honestly following the games through Twitter and whatever gets filtered onto Twitter after what happens. But it is really cool because there is this kind of pro Global South, let's stick it to the Europeans, and we love to see it. We really love to see it. Yeah. So as I said last show, my order of, I don't root for one country. I root for the African teams, Iran, Latin America, and then kind of like wherever else comes in the mix. So
I root for the hot players of the global South.
Sorry,
I
Ghana
love all
won
the memes.
yesterday.
Oh, fantastic. Shout out to Ghana. But no, this is one thing that's so fun about the World Cup is you do get to see these, especially when you see like colonized country play against colonizer and like tire win. It feels good. It like actually feels good for your soul.
It is important.
And there's like so much geopolitics involved. And again, I love all the memes about the Iranian players, and they deserve it. Like, yeah, they are. I mean, look, a lot of football players are very good looking. They're all in great shape. They're of a certain age, so they look good. But like all of the memes about the Iranian players and being so hot, and that the Americans banned them because they're afraid they're going to steal all their women because they're so hot. Like, I love the memes. Keep them going. They're awesome.
Yes,
and just make the
meme creators out there.
Yes, and they make the Americans look so dumb. The American government, because just to politicize sports. I mean, sports are political. But to politicize them in this really pathetic way because you lost a war against Iran, so let's punish the players, just makes you look like such losers. It's so cringy.
And so many people are getting so angry because they're not even able to cheer on their teams. The people from Congo were banned to coming to the United States because of the Ebola outbreak, even though they quarantined in France. So anyways, done with my World Cup rant.
Just total racism. And we'll be doing more World Cup rants throughout. I just want to remind everybody before we get to this next segment where I'm going to be ranting, to make sure you smash that like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm. Also, shout out to Ben McMullen for the donation. Much appreciated. If you want to donate we love our supporters. If you want to donate in the live chat, you absolutely can throw money in there. Also, a reminder to go to breakthroughnews.org/subscribe and become a member of Breakthrough News so that once this show goes behind a paywall, you can access it. You'll still be able to see the segments later on YouTube, but you won't get to see us talk about the hot players in the World Cup or answer your questions directly.
Yeah, so, you can ask us what team do we think is hottest.
Yeah, I will happily answer that question, but you can only find out if you're a member. Serious questions and not serious questions, we'll be answering them. breakthroughnews.org/subscribe. Now, to Iran.
Yes.
Really appreciated Naveed's analysis from inside the country. Very important. But I actually want to go into some of the specifics about this memorandum of understanding. It's worth it because this is a historic defeat for the U.S. and it needs to be understood that way. And that is why the Americans made the concessions that they did. There are so many people that are angry and expressing outrage about these U.S. concessions, but they're actually reacting to the deal, not to the war that produced it, which they were very happy with and to embark on, most of them at least. So I'm going to get into the nitty gritty of the Memorandum of Understanding. I'm also going to talk a bit about the Israeli meltdown taking place over this, which is kind of hilarious, a little scary. A little bit about the Lebanon element, which is part of the Israeli meltdown. And then the Democratic Party leadership is also melting down, which needs to be discussed and needs to be pushed back against because that's actually incredibly dangerous. And then I want to play some golden clips because we've got some golden clips over the last 24 hours that just deserve all the attention in the world. And as very online people, we saw them and we picked out the best ones for you, the viewers. So to begin, why is this memorandum of understanding happening with all these concessions? It's because we've reached kind of like the end of this runway of war, and the U.S. was facing a blocked Strait of Hormuz, nearly exhausted oil reserves, and Iran still has intact missile stockpile, and the Americans and their allies were running low on these incredibly expensive and hard to place interceptors. So that wasn't looking good. Time was not on their side. So the deal reflects that reality. Not the other way around. And look, I get it. Losing is humiliating. These war hawks feel humiliated, but they're also in denial about the fact that they have lost. Except for, I guess, the war hawks like Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. They seem to understand the position they're in. But Trump's massive concessions to Iran, they're not some sort of mystery. They're not some sort of betrayal. He was happy to pursue this war. These concessions reflect the actual balance of power after a U.S.-Israeli defeat. This is what losing looks like in negotiating terms. And I will say Israel is still going to try to torpedo this deal through Lebanon. Like I mentioned during the segment with Naveed, just today, the Israelis carried out drone strikes in the south. They killed at least 3 people. And that comes on top of strikes from yesterday that killed 4 people. So the Israelis are still bombing the south of Lebanon. They're still insisting that they will never leave. In fact, today, the Israeli army released a map showing their so-called security zone, which is a huge chunk of southern Lebanon, that they say that they're never going to leave and they're going to continue to occupy indefinitely. And I want to remind everybody, the scale of the war on Lebanon has killed now at least 3,912 people, wounded another 11,873, displaced more than 1 million since March 2nd. And I say that because there are people who are trying to make the case that, okay, fine, let the Iran war end, but please let Israel keep bombing Lebanon because it's necessary for security. You call 4,000 dead people security? I can't curse, but I want to so badly. Okay, so let's talk about the Memorandum of Understanding, which you may have heard different parts of it, but basically I want to talk about the points that matter, which are almost all of them. But basically, the one involving the Strait of Hormuz, I think, is so important. It reopens the strait toll-free for 60 days. But after that, Iran gets to negotiate with Oman over who controls it like long-term and the way they control it. Now, this is a big defeat for the U.S. Let's remember, the Strait of Hormuz was open before the war, and Iran was not controlling it. And ships flowed through it freely, right? And the Trump administration, the people planning this war were so stupid. They actually said later on, we didn't think they'd close the Strait of Hormuz, except, for decades. That is one of the reasons the U.S. never went to war with Iran, because they knew that could lead to them closing the Strait of Hormuz and give them all this leverage. That is exactly what happened. It was only closed after they launched the war, and then reopening the Strait of Hormuz became the goal of a war that started with an open Strait of Hormuz. So the fact that they had to call it quits here is such a defeat. And the fact that Iran's going to get to make money on it is a defeat for the U.S. Another defeat for the U.S., the frozen funds. The U.S. for a long time now has been seizing Iranian assets and freezing them so Iran can't access their own assets. There's tens of billions of dollars in assets that are frozen by the Americans. This is theft. A significant portion of those assets are set to be released in a final deal. And in Trump's own words, quote, "It's not our money, it's their money." So even he gets that, because this is being portrayed by figures, including inside the Democratic Party, as being some sort of a payoff to our enemies in Iran by American taxpayers. That is inaccurate. That is a blatant lie. This is purely giving Iran back its own money. And I think the number being floated around is like $24 billion in frozen assets, but there's actually way more frozen assets than even that, but we'll see how that plays out. Now, the other point of contention that the war hawks are angry about in this Memorandum of Understanding is $300 billion reconstruction fund. Now, this is a private investment vehicle funded by mostly Gulf, Asian, and African companies and U.S. companies, not government money. Iran only gets access if it meets certain commitments after the final 60-day deal goes into effect, which is going to be the next 60 days of negotiations. This is the one that people keep trotting out saying, Trump is giving Iran $300 billion in your taxpayer money. That is a lie. This is in an investment fund by companies, not your taxpayer money. And Iran deserves this money because America spent a very, very long time bombing, America and Israel, bombing Iranian civilian infrastructure that needs to be rebuilt in a war of aggression. Moving on from that, and I'll show some I'll talk a bit more about that because I want to play clips related to that. Another defeat for the Americans. And I promise you, this is worth going through. Sanctions. The final deal commits the U.S. to ending all sanctions. We'll see what actually happens with that, but either way, there's immediate oil export waivers upon signing. This is a huge defeat. It is a complete reversal of the maximum pressure campaign that has been pursued by American war hawks for the last decade, sanctions against Iran for the last 40 years. They have been trying to strangle this country and suffocate it for decades to try to overthrow the government. So to have to reverse course on even some of those is a big deal, and that is a humiliating defeat for the U.S. It shows you the position, the balance that we're talking about here. The U.S. would not sign this memorandum of understanding unless they were desperate. Now, next is the nuclear program. Iran, of course, reaffirms no nuclear weapons. That's a 50-year-old commitment. So if you want to call that a win for America, fine. But they also were against building nuclear weapons before and had a commitment to that. Their issue of enrichment, of zero enrichment, is not mentioned in this memorandum. And there's basically leeway now, especially based on Trump's comments, that Iran may be able to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes. This is something that's going to be negotiated over the next 60 days. And of course, the Americans are talking about shipping out or destroying uranium, but we're hearing, the Iranians say, actually, we're probably not going to do that. So we'll see how that plays out in the negotiations over the next 60 days. But basically what's in this memorandum, because of the language that's not in it, matters and is part of the defeat by the Americans. Ballistic missiles. What's amazing here is ballistic missiles are not even addressed in this memorandum. And that matters because if you look at any demand, any complaint by American war hawks about Iran, one of them is their ballistic missiles program. Why? Because they just spent the last 3 months firing ballistic missiles at regional American allies who were firing at them and the Israelis. And in addition to drones, but these ballistic missiles have demonstrated to be very important for Iran's defense capabilities. And the Americans and Israelis do not want Iranians to have defensive capabilities. They want them to just be like another, vassal state that is, a client of the Americans that's incapable of defending themselves or ever challenging American or Israeli hegemony. So not having this in there is a win for the Iranians and a defeat for the Americans. And I will be playing a clip of Donald Trump talking about that. It's really funny. I already talked about Lebanon, but I just want to note the official text commits both sides to, quote, ensuring the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon as part of their ending the war on all fronts. Now, this is going to be, I think, the most vulnerable point of this memorandum because of the Israelis saying that they are not bound by this memorandum or this deal. They've actually said that, and that they refuse to withdraw. So this is a live fight that's happening in real time. It's going to continue to happen. Like I said, the Israelis have been, bombing Lebanon despite this memorandum. Now that it's been signed, they're still bombing. So we'll see how Iran actually responds to that, or if the Americans take Iran's warnings about those violations seriously and actually do at some point rein in the Israelis. But I will say the intensity of violence in Lebanon has definitely decreased. And as for the enforcement of this memorandum, there was no real binding mechanism in the interim, but the final deal is said to, in the memorandum says it will be endorsed by the UN Security Council as a resolution, which is what would make it binding. And then, that the whole thing kind of runs on the threat of renewed bombing because Trump is still or resumed bombing because Trump is still making those threats out loud. But a part of the text does say we won't threaten each other anymore. So I guess he's already violated the memorandum. I don't know if you saw him yesterday at G7. He was like, if they don't do what I want, I'm going to bomb them again. So, we'll see how this plays out. As for in Lebanon, Sheikh Naim Qassem, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, actually called this memorandum a big victory. He thanked Iran for tying the Lebanese front to the broader deal and forcing the Israelis to stop, and said that the war's real goal of toppling the regime, the Iranian government, failed. He said in his televised address that the bite of American tyranny was broken and Washington's colonialist project for Iran failed. And then on negotiating with Israel, he said that talks should be limited strictly to mutual security. Any disarmament proposal will not pass. Domestic issues, weapons, defense strategy stay off the table entirely. This is important that he's saying this, by the way, because of the fact that Hezbollah is going to come out in a stronger position if Iran comes out in a stronger position. And we haven't heard much from the Lebanese authorities, who for the past 2 months have been insisting, we don't want to be a part of the ceasefire deal with Iran. Now they're really quiet, and people in Lebanon are feeling very thankful that because of Iran that Lebanon is not being carpet bombed right now. We'll see how long that lasts, but it is noted by a lot of the population that that's what's taking place. So this is certainly going to shift the dynamics and the power structure in Lebanon away from the sort of pro-American anti-resistance camp. The Israelis are having a meltdown. a few entertaining examples. Channel 14, which is this like very pro Netanyahu channel. It's like a propaganda channel for him. It was for Trump until now. It's one of its biggest hosts, this guy Yinon Magal. He's the host of a show called The Patriots. He called Trump a loser, called JD Vance scum, and accused Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner of selling out their brothers in Israel and then derided them as Jew boys. And because he derided them as Jew boys, it ended up drawing public condemnation from the ADL, which says that the remark demeans and degrades Jews, which is true. But also you rarely see that kind of conversation from the ADL. And then you've got, a bunch of other people, an opposition leader calling Netanyahu weak, ill, isolated, lacking influence. Like they're all attacking Netanyahu now. Naftali Bennett has piled on, calling the government incapable, using the F word, saying Netanyahu
There's such a
has no
genocidal
judgment.
society. I'm so sorry, but it's just like, you just like the outrage when people can't keep committing genocide is like, what the
And this is not a clip of Israelis, but I want to show part of the kind of meltdown we're seeing from their biggest supporters in the U.S. So basically, there's this guy called John Podhoretz. Is that how you pronounce his name? It's an odd last name. I can never really pronounce it right. And by the way, this is clip 3. I'm telling that to Matt, who's in the booth, taking care of everything. I want to play clip 3, just to set it up. This is John Podhoretz talking like this is a big Trump supporter, huge Israel supporter. Okay. Like Israel comes first and foremost above all. And he's the editor of Commentary magazine. If that means anything to you, Commentary is a very right-wing neoconservative rag. And I want to play his meltdown because what he said is very important. Clip number 3.
Trump, the crazy lunatic psychotic who doesn't care about lives and will do anything and do anything, could not bear the idea of putting a boot on the ground anywhere in Iran, and could not bear the idea of a single American possibly being taken hostage, which I understand. I'm not saying that either of those is a good thing, but if you're going to go to war, you have to put boots on the ground. Everyone in the military has volunteered to put their lives on the line for their country, and that the country itself may have to sacrifice in the form of wildly higher oil prices. Trump, the crazy lunatic psychotic who doesn't care about lives and will do anything.
Yeah, so there you have. I just couldn't believe he was like, and then at one point he goes, people join the military voluntarily. Like they sign up to die. So like if you're going to go to war, you got to go all the way. So he's like very upset Trump didn't do a ground invasion. So like that's the kind of reaction Trump is getting from like these psychos. I also want to play a clip of Donald Trump himself talking about the kind of like Israel meltdown. He's sort of addressing it. He talks a little bit about Lebanon as well. So can we play clip number 1?
We had this deal done. You had a deal that was going to give them legally a nuclear weapon. And if that happened, Israel would have been blown away. And in all fairness to Bibi Netanyahu, who happens to be a good man, gets a little excited sometimes. But he happens to be a very good man. We've had an amazing partnership. He's been an amazing prime minister. We have a little dispute over Lebanon. I say, you can do a little softer touch, Bibi. You don't have to knock down a building every time somebody walks into it that's from Hezbollah. But it's been an amazing partnership. But he will say, we're the big partner and he's the very small partner, and that's true. So he came to the country and he begged Barack Hussein Obama, the president, not to do the JCPOA.
So there you have Trump saying a lot of interesting things, including we're the big partner, they're the small partner. Like, know your place, buddy.
Yeah.
And all of you who are behind. And he's right. I mean, look, he's right. Like, just from a very, like, even strongman perspective, know your place. Like, you are not in charge of the U.S. We say the war is over. Get in line. Now, is this theater so that Israel can be bad cop and U.S. can be good cop? I'm actually not entirely sure, because Israel is trying to obstruct a deal that the Americans do seem to be pretty desperate for. And we'll get to it. We'll show some clips about why. I want to really quickly, though, address Democrats. Because they've been doing something very dangerous. Like, You want to go after Trump for starting this war? Absolutely. This was a illegal war of aggression unprovoked in the middle of diplomatic negotiations with Iran. That should have never happened. Go after him for that. Do not go after him for ending it. But that's what they're doing. They're going after him for making any concessions. Senator Amy Klobuchar, failed presidential candidate because she doesn't know how to speak, tweeted out yesterday she's referring to the $300 billion reconstruction fund. Remember, that is not American taxpayer money. But she says, with $300 billion, we could end homelessness, fund cancer research for 40 years, and give every child free pre-K for over 7 years. Instead, Trump is sending it to Iran. This is not America first, not even close. Amy,
you okay?
This is not taxpayer money. Yeah, right there. No, she's not. Amy's not okay. Because the thing is, all those things she just said that we could fund with $300 billion aren't even things she supports. Like, she doesn't even support spending public funds on, as far as I know, on like free pre-K. I've never seen her being like, we should end homelessness right now. And also, it's just a dumb argument because this is not American taxpayer money. Meanwhile, you know what is American taxpayer money? The tens of billions of dollars we've given to Israel to commit genocides. She doesn't seem to, I've never seen her complain about that. Have you, Zoe?
No.
So, yeah. So Senator Amy Klobuchar, shut up. You fail. Susan Rice, who was, I think, the former national security director under Barack Obama, said this is the biggest national security blunder in decades. But she was basically referring to the deal. I'm like, girl, go after the war, but why the deal? Rep. Adam Schiff, hard to imagine a more thorough capitulation. Actually, if you keep this war going, you're going to have to capitulate harder. So either capitulate a little bit now or capitulate more later because time is not on your side, Mr. Imperialist Adam Schiff. Senator Chris Murphy, this agreement looks essentially like surrender. If that's how you feel, fine, but wait until after so we don't go back to war. Do not encourage Donald Trump to continue this war because surrender. This is an egomaniac. Do not do that. Go after him for starting the war. But like Chris Murphy is so upset that we're going to unfreeze funds. And then we've got Senator Cory Booker, a dependable hawk. We're going to be releasing billions of dollars to this enemy. Okay. All right.
People
Cory Booker,
still
so you want to
think
keep the war going?
That like Iran's missiles can somehow hit California like that, which Trump's own press secretary had to say was not true. But Rania, something just came in from a JD Vance's press conference that I just want to read because it is a direct response to not only these Democrats, but also the Israelis. So JD Vance was giving, I think it was in a press conference, he said, this is very funny. Donald J. Trump is the only head of state in the entire world who is sympathetic to the nation of Israel at this moment in time. Okay, that's a lot, first of all.
Correct.
If I was in the cabinet of the Israeli government, I might not be attacking the only powerful ally that I have anywhere left in the entire world. So, I mean, that's just incredible because, first of all, JD Vance also knows how unpopular Israel is right now. Like, he has a mind and he has eyes, I guess. And he is aware of what, supporting Israel means. And yeah, they're checking him. And I just think it's an important message to all of those America First people saying that Israel is dictating. Like, no, let's be, yeah. So
I love that he said that. I mean, look, but
when he's
kudos
right, he's right.
to JD Vance. Kudos to JD Vance. If I were this administration, if I had the politics they have, I would be livid. I would be livid that like these ungrateful man babies are like whining like this. It's like,
let us genocide more. Like, we want to genocide more. It's disgusting.
It didn't work out. Yeah, it's like it's like insubordination.
Yeah.
To the highest degree.
Know your place. You literally are getting free weapons and free money, and they're getting free healthcare that we don't have. So
yeah. No, it's crazy. I'm glad JD Vance said that. And they trot out JD Vance whenever they're serious because notice JD Vance disappeared during much of the height of this war because he didn't want to be connected to it. And this is not to say JD Vance is a great guy. He's an opportunistic hack. who was just like, will be a yes man if it means maintaining power. But he was, according to the New York Times, like basically the one of two people in the room, in the Situation Room, who were like, that's not a good idea, guys. This is not going to work out. Not on board. Because this is bad. Like, objectively speaking, if you're an imperialist, there's everything points to this being a wrong move. Like, there's a reason that the U.S. hadn't gone to war against Iran for all this time, but Trump came into power and his administration was lined with all these like psychotic neocon hawks who finally got their like wet dream, and it went disastrously wrong. And now here they are having to capitulate and make concessions, and Democrats need to stop attacking it. If you're going to attack Trump for going to war, just shut up otherwise. It's completely absurd. I want to play a couple more clips of Trump, because yesterday at G7, he just said all these things that really are logical and shouldn't be shocking, but you don't usually hear in America. This is the one thing, the one amusing thing about Trump. He's a horrible person. He's basically a fascist, terrible to have in power, but every once in a while he gives you theatrical gold. So I want to play clip 7, talking about Iran's right to have weapons. Clip 7. Clip 7, where are you? Calling it there.
So we'll be working on a parallel effort with the Gulf nations to address non-nuclear issues such as the conventional ballistic missiles, which we'll be talking about, and support. I mean, they have to have some because other people have some. You got to have some. Somebody said you shouldn't give them more. And I have guys. I like some of these guys. But I don't think they're smart. Sir, you shouldn't let them have any missile. I said, well, what am I going to do? They're going to let Saudi Arabia have missiles, but they can't have them? Yes, sir. It doesn't work that way, It doesn't work that way. And missiles aren't the problem. Missiles they hurt a little location, but they don't blow up the planet. So the Gulf nations will address the non-nuclear issues
So, Zoe, on the right to missiles, I want to show a clip from CNN, one of their main anchors. I think her name is Katie Collins. Is that right? She's also very upset that Iran, that missiles aren't addressed. And she's like interrogating this Republican member of Congress who like is trying to follow the Trump line. And she's very upset about it. So can we play clip number 8? Because this is worth it, guys.
Senator, are you okay with Iran having missiles?
I'm hesitating. I'd prefer that they not. I certainly don't want them to have long-distance missiles. I don't want them to have nuclear-armed missiles. I would prefer they didn't. But I don't think that's the key issue here. I think that they have to be able to defend themselves. And I just kind of come back to the big picture here, is that the Middle East countries like this agreement.
You think Iran needs to be able to defend itself?
I do. I think that they have to be able to defend themselves. Otherwise, we turn this into a forever war. You're never going to get them short of boots on the ground of surrendering everything, an unconditional agreement, if you will. But again, what I'm getting at here is this agreement has the support of most of the countries in the Middle East, and I think that's going to give it more of a long-lasting relationship, a long-lasting success as well.
She's so upset.
Oh, by the way,
she's so upset.
Caitlin Collins. It's Caitlin Collins, by the way. Sorry, I sounded like I know her. I'm like, Katie, I don't know her. And if I did, I'd be like, Katie, chill out. How much are they paying? Did Bari Weiss already take over CNN? Like, what the hell is that about?
I just also want to say that it does reflect this kind of imperialist hubris where you think you are the only country that matters. Nobody else should have weapons. Nobody else should be able to defend themselves. Nobody's sovereignty matters. And everything that matters is just the U.S. being safe and the U.S. being able to go wherever it wants, take the resource it wants. And like that is an extension of like what she said is an extension of that.
Yes. I want to also play another clip of Trump. It's clip number 5. And this is a response to all the people saying that you're going to give them American taxpayer money. How dare you? It's a lie. And he should continue saying this line to his detractors because it's a blatant lie. And this is actually one of the talking points that worries me, because it's a very Republican talking point. It's the one they attacked Obama with. And the more you say it, the more it might actually work to torpedo a deal like this. So let's listen to clip number 5.
Can you explain, though, what the difference is between giving Iran U.S. dollars and unfreezing U.S. dollars?
Well, the unfreezing is an easy one to answer. We have taken a lot of their money, and we have their money. We have taken their money. It's not our money. It's their money, and we froze it. At a certain point in time, I guess we're going to have to give it back.
So he understands sanctions and freezing assets. Unfortunately, the majority of the press corps refuses to understand that the U.S. actually does this to a lot of countries, and the U.S. has frozen billions of dollars of people's assets because they set up the international financial architecture to be able to do this precisely, to punish countries when they step out of line and assert their sovereignty, and then say, okay, well, we're going to freeze your gold. We're not going to let you access the money that you have.
Your money, your resources. That's what they did to Venezuela. They stole Venezuela's gold and gave it to Juan Guaido, who wasn't actually the president of Venezuela. I mean, it's completely insane. And there he is just admitting it. And it is shocking. You're just you wonder, I'm are you a propagandist or are you stupid? Or when you see these reporters behaving this way. I wanted to play also, so you heard the weapons issue. Iran, I mean, yeah, they're going to have weapons, right? We can't, Saudi Arabia has weapons, but we're going to tell Iran they can't. There was also a similar take about nuclear enrichment on this from Donald Trump, which I was really surprised to hear. So can we play clip number 2, the nuclear enrichment riff?
It is a little hard, though, when you say that somebody wants it, other people have it, other adjoining states have it, and you're not letting them have it for purposes of electricity and things like that. It's always a little tough. You have to use a little common sense, please.
I mean, it's yes, that I have nothing else to add other than literally Israel has nuclear weapons, and Iran isn't even trying to get a nuclear weapon. They just want nuclear enrichment for peaceful purposes, as they have a right to, because they're a party to the nuclear treaty.
Also,
so they have a right to nuclear enrichment.
Trump would not have to answer these questions had he not started an unprovoked and illegal war on Iran. So it's also important. If he had not withdrawn from the JCPOA in 2018, he would not have to be answering the same questions that were raised at that time. But instead, he withdrew.
Oh my God.
It's
you know what we need? We need a side-by-side of Trump before and then Trump after responding to Trump's propaganda before. To see it, because he's made the opposite argument before, which were lies, and now he's just being honest because it behooves him with ending this war. Now, last clip I want to play speaks to why he needs to end this war and why he's subjecting himself to this level of humiliation. Let's play clip number 4, please. Clip number 4.
Now, if I did the opposite, if I went out and continued to bomb them for another 4, just bomb the hell out of them, I'd get bad press on that. No, there's nothing I can do. But what this does is it allows the ships to go. If we keep bombing, those ships won't be going. And you're talking about $500, $600, $700 million a day. It's a lot of money. A lot of money. That's why the world is okay. It's liquid. It's fine. Also, we run out of reserves in about 4 weeks. There are reserves all over the world, and we would really run out. And there'll be a time when you wouldn't be able to get it. And you want to see bedlam? So for all those so-called geniuses that want to show me how smart they are, ask them why didn't they blow up General Soleimani? Ask that of the general and a couple of other people that I like very much, but boy, are they wrong.
Boy, are they wrong.
Boy, are they wrong. But no, I mean, he literally just explained to you that Iran shut the Strait of Hormuz. It's screwing the global economy. And if we do it for another 4 weeks, it's going to get worse. So we have to do this. We have to sign a deal with them. And that is why, to go full circle, this is an American-Israeli defeat. The Israelis are in denial and also so obsessed with killing, they don't care even about pleasing their masters, which is actually quite self-destructive. for them. And all of these war hawks in the US, they're just insane. I mean, what's like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. They literally think that if you just keep bombing them, eventually you'll win. And no, Iran has the opportunity and the ability to shut down the global economy. Trump got to a point, I think he recognized that pretty early on, kept trying the bombing thing. It didn't work with the runway time they had. And now it's like, you got to call it a quits or the world goes under. So there you have it. That is my rants, several rants. Zoe, do you want to add anything about, there's one more thing I want to show, but about any of those clips or what we just watched or anything that I said that you disagree with? Bring it on.
Well, it's rare that I
snorted. Disagree with it. We don't, me and Zoe are an echo chamber, to be honest.
But I just do want to point out that on Tuesday, a collaboration was launched between Lockheed Martin and General Motors to ramp up U.S. weapons production in response to exactly what brought about, in part what brought about an end to this war, which is depleted stockpiles, because actually to fight a war, you need things. You need things to fire.
You need the things. I like that. You need things.
You need all of that. You need the Iron Dome, and the Iron Dome actually has components to it. It is not a permanent structure, despite the name. But really, I think this is a quite important development, because I think a lot of people, it is a defeat for the U.S. and Israel. But as we spoke about earlier with Prem regarding this Section 224 and trying to, lock in this collaboration between the U.S. and Israel, obviously people are feeling the defeat, but they're planning for the future. And that's why there's this kind of impetus to ramp up weapons production. The Europe G7 meeting just wrapped up. The European Council is meeting, I think, tomorrow. They're going to approve a budget for the next 7 years, which sees an increase in military spending. And so I think it's really important that while we have to be very excited that this was a defeat for the U.S. and Israel and their blind killing rampages, this doesn't mean those are over, and that they are definitely recalculating and planning their next steps. And as always, looking towards China, looking towards the kind of bigger enemy, which in a lot of ways they were preparing for. So we have an article about that on breakthroughnews.org. Please check it out. It is a very important update because it does, again, point to what is the direction of the U.S. in the future, which is not peace, but continuing this drive towards militarism and, $1 trillion a year of military spending.
Yeah, and I want to clarify, like when I say this is a big American defeat, it's a defeat in the sense that the Americans didn't achieve any of their goals. Actually they came out of this, Iran came out of this in a stronger position, obviously with a lot of sacrifice and loss. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that the Americans have suddenly lost the ability to exact huge amounts of destruction. And you know what? A lot of American adversaries who are smaller and weaker than Iran, they don't have the leverage of the Strait of Hormuz. Yeah. Cuba does not have a Strait of Hormuz that it can block to try to get concessions from the Americans. Neither does Venezuela. And a lot of these other countries at the other side of American imperialism. So yes, this doesn't mean like U.S. empire is over, but it's definitely a turning point for sure. And actually might produce an even more violent pattern from U.S. empire, because, it's like a cornered animal gets defeated. How does it behave? Starts to thrash about and lash out even more. I want to end this segment, which I know was a bit longer than we intended, but so much to get through, on the New York Post front page. The New York Post said, there it is. Trump devastated Iran. Now he hits them with a love bomb. The president says Islamic regime not radical. His deal showers mullahs with cash and no sanctions. I'm like, what is even happening? It's like they still love Trump, but they're very upset with him.
Very upset.
That's like it's a wild front page. Love bombed by Iran. Love bombed by Donald Trump.
Well, what they're forgetting in this therapy speak is that love bomb is just the first step, but usually disappearance and kind of betrayal is the second step.
Right, extreme emotional terrorism comes after love bomb.
Yeah, so
nothing good. So hopefully Iran doesn't fall for the love bombing.
No, I don't think they will. And I'm glad that we had Naveed on to talk about this kind of sentiment of people they're very, I think within Iran, they're very clear that the U.S., the only way they were able to agree to this deal was Iran showing kind of this hardened stance and not backing down at any moment in this war. And I think they know that's what it takes to make the United States actually make concessions. So I don't think they're going to change their strategy anytime soon.
On that note, Zoe, we have reached the end of our show, which went longer than anticipated because if you get me started, I don't stop.
And if you get me started, I continue with you.
Girl power hour. What was supposed to be like a 15-minute segment definitely became like a 45-minute one. But I'm okay with it because this is a huge story.
It's
and deserves a breakdown. It is historic. And we'll continue to follow developments and bring you more news. Tomorrow, the Americans and Iranians are supposed to be meeting in Switzerland for the first day of these 60-day negotiations. So those negotiations are not going to go smoothly. There's going to be a lot of hiccups throughout. And the Israelis will continue to try to be spoiler in addition to Donald Trump responding to the endless stream of war hawks across the partisan aisle, bipartisan war hawks, trying to come after him for daring to compromise with another country. All that said, for those who are watching, make sure that you have smashed that like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm. Make sure that you have checked out our brand new website, breakthroughnews.org. It has got a beautiful glow up and with lots of coverage, groundbreaking on-the-ground coverage from all around the world. And if you are able to, consider becoming a member of Breakthrough News by going to breakthroughnews.org/subscribe, where you, for as little as $5 a month, can access exclusive content, as well as exclusive merch, as well as this live stream, which has come to you free for 3 weeks now. But that will stop next week. Next week, this will be behind a paywall and only available to members. If you like watching me and Zoe give you the news, become a member, breakthroughnews.org/subscribe. The segments that we do with guests will still be put out later on in the day for you to see on YouTube. But the live stream itself and all the fun banter in between will only be available to members in addition to our special Q&A session where we will respond to member questions. So breakthroughnews.org/subscribe. It's how we're able to keep Breakthrough News going and growing. And Zoe, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I think with that, we will be following the news. Tomorrow is Juneteenth, which is a federal holiday commemorating the end of slavery fought for by enslaved people. So that's an important day. Breakthrough will be semi-off, but all that to say, we will be back with you next Tuesday with another episode of Breakthrough Live, this time behind a paywall, and those segments will be published later that day. So make sure to follow breakthroughnews.org for all of the latest on the Iran deal and Colombian elections and other things across the world. We are bringing you news from all of the continents, and we're excited to do it. So we'll see you next week.